When we set out to democratize access to space, we started with launch. We wanted to make it easy for small satellites to get to orbit faster and more frequently, and to do it on their terms. So we built a rocket unlike any other. One that could be built and launched in days, not months or years. A rocket that could be recovered and then launched again. A rocket that puts small satellites in control of their own mission. Electron changed the way we access space. But launch was only ever the beginning. We didn't just make it easier to get to space. We made it easier to do incredible things once you're there. Our spacecraft solutions enable science, innovation, and exploration. Turning possibility into capability on orbit. The satellites we build and launch are keeping countries connected and borders protected. They're monitoring weather and managing waste. They're providing insights on climate change and helping us manage resources for generations to come. They're bringing the solar system within reach, ushering in a new era of affordable interplanetary exploration to the Moon, Mars, Venus, and beyond. And that's just our story so far. As the world's reliance on space infrastructure grows, we're looking to what's next. Developing a new class of launch vehicle to deploy the mega constellations of the future, providing vital services to billions of people down here on Earth. Space has defined some of humanity's greatest achievements, and it holds the keys to our future. And with Rocket Lab, space is open for business.
So to speak on this and much more, it is now my pleasure to introduce Peter Beck, founder and chief executive of Rocket Lab. Peter is a true pioneer. He is responsible for New Zealand's ascent into the space industry, redefining it with rapid and cost-effective delivery of innovative, high-quality technology. I think it's fair to say that without Peter's input, the chances that we'd be here dedicating so much time to space at a New Zealand-US business event, it just wouldn't have happened. Peter is joining us live from the United States, where among other things, he's preparing for that exciting mission to the moon as part of the Capstone mission, which is a collaboration between New Zealand and the United States, and the first launch to the moon from New Zealand's Mahia Peninsula. We will have some time at the end of his address for questions, so do keep them coming through. And can you now please join me in welcoming Peter Beck?
Brilliant. Well, it's truly an honour to be able to talk today. Sorry I can't be there in person. But I guess what I'll start off with here is why space, and how can New Zealand sort of play in it? And the thing that really got me hooked on space from a very, very young child was the ability to actually have impact. And I look at space, and to me it's just infrastructure. And if you build a bridge in a city, that's great, that services those people who use that bridge in a city. But outside that city, it's pretty much useless to everybody else on the planet. Whereas space, you put a satellite in orbit, and every 90 minutes that satellite is orbiting the Earth and providing data to all of us down here. And I'm reminded of the satellite we launched a few years ago, the weather satellite, and it provides weather to New Zealand, to Australia, to America, to the UK, in fact, so many countries around the world. And this is a little box of electronics about the size of a small refrigerator, and it can just have such huge impact to so many people. And that's one of the wonderful things about space. In the New Zealand context especially, we spend a lot of time, explaining to people, well, why is space relevant to me? I'm just down here on Earth. I'm not planning on going to the moon or anything. So how is space at all relevant to me? Well, the truth is that we all rely on space every single day for just about everything we do. Whether it's weather, obviously an important one, but even just logistics. All the ships, the aeroplanes, trains, and trucks are all GPS enabled and quite often enabled by space-based communication. So whether you're ordering a pizza or flying to the US, it's all enabled by space. And of course, that little funny grey dish on the side of a lot of people's roofs pointing to the sky where the telly comes from, once again, all coming from space. So lots of communication. And then kind of the things that are less obvious, monitoring soil moistures and temperatures and various elements that are important to farmers, and crop management. And of course, science, education and learning. There's nothing that sees the sparkle of a children's eye more than touching something that's been to space or watching a rocket launch. So it's a huge enabler for STEM. Then, of course, finally, climate monitoring and climate change. Space is the ultimate high ground, and having the ability to sit above it and persistently look down and really, monitor macro level changes and measure things is, you really can only do from space. So lots of things in our everyday lives that we absolutely rely on for space. So there's an interesting slide. If you can see right down the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little red dot that says New Zealand. And you can see New Zealand is this tiny little place in a giant expansion of ocean. And I'm often asked the question, why on earth, New Zealand? We're obviously, we started in New Zealand as a company, but we've been a US company for many years and have lots of operations in the US and in New Zealand. So why do all this down in New Zealand? And I think, a lot of people's answers would be, oh, Pete's a Kiwi and he likes being down there, so that's why we do it. Actually, that's not the reason at all. If you're looking to launch a rocket really frequently, the one thing you need is no neighbours. And this is the wonderful thing about New Zealand. A small island nation in the middle of nowhere is absolutely the perfect place to go to space and go to orbit and Moon and Mars and beyond from. So that was the genesis of why we have any operations in New Zealand. We've got a bunch of products. The first and most well-known being is our Electron launch vehicle. It's a small launch vehicle dedicated to lifting small satellites into orbit. The size of satellites have shrunken tremendously over the years, and we saw a really important opportunity for a small launch vehicle to go and fill that market niche. We've launched a bunch now, and we operate multiple launch pads around the world, and just about flowing every commercial and or US government customer you can imagine, from incredibly important and challenging customers like the NRO through to NASA for multiple missions, and then lots and lots of commercial organisations. Launch infrastructure is incredibly important, and we have multiple launch pads here in New Zealand. So we run 2 launch pads in New Zealand and one launch pad in Wallops Island, Virginia, and that gives us all of the launch capability that we could possibly imagine. In fact, between those 2 pads, we can launch every 72 hours for the next 20 years. So that's really important when you want to go to space frequently. And once again, you can see the collaboration between having pads in New Zealand and pads in the US. And we're actually the second most frequently launched US rocket. So the rocket, half the rocket is built in the United States, the other half is built in New Zealand. It's launched in New Zealand, but actually flies under an FAA launch license. So if you want to talk about bilateral collaborations, I think this is a great poster child. not only was from an engineering perspective, lots of bilateral collaboration, but from a regulatory perspective, and lots of bilateral agreements and treaties that were required in order for us to be able to launch. I think not many people realize that second most frequently launched US rocket, actually fourth most frequently launched rocket in the world. So it goes SpaceX, and then Russia, China, and then us. So an incredibly successful product in that respect. But we know a lot for launch, but it's not just launch that we do. So we do the full gambit of end-to-end space systems. So we launch a bunch, we build lots of satellites, and also we're moving into also providing satellite applications or the data that's generated from space. So we're really unique in the fact that between US and New Zealand, literally you go from an idea right through to orbit. So, satellite designing and manufacturing, we build satellite components, we have flight software, we've got launch sites obviously and launch vehicles. And then once the satellite's on orbit, we actually do the satellite operations as well. And another little fun fact, so 38% of all the rockets that were launched last year had a Rocket Lab component on it somewhere, whether it was part of the satellite or part of the rocket. 38% of every rocket that was launched, whether it be the payload or the rocket, there was a Rocket Lab logo somewhere. So we really do a lot more than just launch. And of course, we have global footprint. So lots of operations in New Zealand, both from design, analysis, manufacturing, test, and also launch. Same in the US, we're spread across lots of different states in the US and also in Canada. And we employ around about 1,300 people these days. So we've been growing fairly quickly across all of that. And then what we're really trying to do here is grow and enable a global space economy. So lots of Rocket Lab products have been on some pretty cool missions. So we did the solar panels on the James Webb Telescope and did some software for LADI, the solar panels on the Mars Ingenuity and the Mars helicopter are ours. And yeah, lots of really cool things, more than 1,700 spacecraft and spacecraft components on orbit and counting between us and all of our family companies. So this is where I guess you could say, it would have been easy to stay a little New Zealand company and launching a rocket now and then, but this is where we're able to expand throughout the US and globally to make a significant global footprint and really play our part in the global economy in space, and not just be a little player down in New Zealand. And of course, we have a larger launch vehicle that's under development right now. It delivers up to 15 tons into low Earth orbit. It's capable of human spaceflight as well. This is another fantastic collaboration of a really substantial project between the two countries. A lot of composite work is done down in New Zealand, propulsion work done up here in the US, some testing down in New Zealand, some launch. The launch will be done in the US. So, really a super strong collaboration between all of our business units and the two countries. And we're not just stopping at launch and spacecraft. We're reaching far beyond. And as mentioned in the introduction, the Capstone mission to the moon. It's a NASA project that we've been working for a number of years now. Set to launch here in just a few weeks. This is really New Zealand's Apollo moment. This will be the first spacecraft of the Artemis program going to the moon and launched out of the Mahia Peninsula. And it's an incredibly challenging mission. Going to the moon is no joke. It's actually really hard. So that mission is set to launch very shortly, and not many countries get to go to the moon. So we're really excited to be able to fly that one out of New Zealand. We also have missions to Mars. So we have two spacecraft that we're building right now that will orbit Mars. When they arrive, Rocket Lab will have 20% of all of the orbiting spacecraft around Mars will have Rocket Lab logos on them. So that's pretty cool. And a bunch of other really difficult but exciting programs, one to Venus, another NASA project for once again for deep space missions. So with that, trying to be conscious of time, happy to hand it over.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was amazing. I have a lot of questions here. I can see there's some coming through on the Slido platform as well. But I wanted to begin by just asking you, you've just arrived back in the US, and I know that like many of us, you spent the last couple of years here sort of in New Zealand. What's it like being back?
Wonderful. No, I've got 2 years of catching up to do. I mean, we took the company public on the NASDAQ from my office at my house. So there's it's great to see the world reconnecting with New Zealand again, and we've all got a whole lot of stuff to catch up. So it's wonderful to see it all up and running again.
Mm. I also wanted to ask, this morning we heard from Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo, and she mentioned the work that Rocket Lab is doing in her address to the summit. And I guess Rocket Lab's really helped to propel New Zealand as being a prominent player in the space industry. And I just wondered if you could talk to the role that private business can play in helping to strengthen those bilateral connections.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So, I mean, space especially, it's one of those things that can really span relationships. Space is very strategic to a lot of nations. Not many nations have it. I think there's 11 nations with sovereign capabilities to access space. Being able to use those capabilities and share them between nations is incredibly important. Especially in these times where the world looks a little bit wobbly. It's certainly very important to keep those relationships tight and also share the skills and the knowledge between the two countries to inform us and keep us all safe.
Mm. We've had a couple of questions that have come through mentioning space junk, and I guess one of the things here. Well, actually, there's quite a few questions on this. How much space junk is created with each of your deployments is one of the questions. And another one says that this person, anonymous, loves that you're doing everything possible to recycle and reuse. Could you talk a little bit about that? And also, are these efforts countered by the subsequent increase in space junk?
Yeah, I mean, we've always taken the view of being tidy Kiwis, and the way we actually designed the rocket, the Electron rocket from the beginning, was to ensure that wherever possible we would leave nothing behind. So, when we go to orbit, our second stage, which is the largest piece of space junk, if you will, survives no more than 4 weeks before it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere and burns up. Same with our upper stage, our kick stage. It has a little rocket on it. So after we deploy our customer satellite, we'll generally do a deorbit burn on that and bring that home as well. And that might sound, just normal, but actually that is not normal within the industry. And especially within an industry right now that is just growing so tremendously, having the forethought and the responsibility really to ensure that you're not leaving junk behind is super important. Like I say, it's probably the industry's dirty little secret that, not all the junk up there is dead satellites. There's a good portion of that is dead rockets. So, ensuring that you leave nothing behind, we really felt was our obligation.
Mm. You mentioned going public on the NASDAQ. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what that boost in capital has meant for Rocket Lab.
Yeah, I mean, as a private company, we never struggled to raise capital. It was going public. It was less about raising capital, but more about having a public currency to go and do stuff with. And since we've gone public, we've bought 3 companies already, and certainly been very strategic in the way that we've been able to use that public currency. But it's certainly, access to capital certainly is strong when you're a publicly traded company and doing well.
There's another question that's come here through from Esther Guy Meakin, who asks about, we've heard a lot this morning about the shortage of talent and labour, and there's a question whether this is an issue for you at Rocket Lab, and what are you able to do to address it?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. I mean, the company has always been throttled by, the talent feeding the machine. And quite frankly, only the best work for Rocket Lab. The bar is extraordinarily high. So, for us, we only take the very, very best talent. And that's great because, in some respects, because engineers that come to Rocket Lab, or anybody who comes to Rocket Lab, knows they're working alongside the best in the industry on the most exciting projects, whether it's going to Mars or going to the moon, or building a new rocket. They're all super exciting projects. But, I mean, there is an absolute talent brawl fight going on right now, especially within this industry. We have just an absolute boom in the space industry with lots of big, exciting projects. You can cry into your cornflakes and fight for talent, but actually you need to create it. So for many years now, we've been running apprenticeship programs down in New Zealand. We have scholarships. We've had 5 PhDs in a collaboration with University of Canterbury. So we do a lot to create the talent. Over 160 school visits to try and get kids really excited about space and careers in space and in STEM. So it's a big program for us, and we put a lot of resource into there. And I would say that, in the last year or so, we're finally seeing the fruits of our labour. We're finally seeing the kids that we touched at school now becoming apprentices, or at university, they're just coming out of university and looking for jobs. So it's a long road, but you have to invest in the pipeline for sure.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Question here on the sanctions, which has again been quite a common topic today. Just asking whether the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia and the Russian launch vehicles therefore being taken off the global market, how has that impacted Rocket Lab and the New Zealand space economy?
Well, I mean, we have no Russian components in any of our vehicles or any part of our supply chain. The large launch vehicle that we're developing, the Neutron launch vehicle, was kind of intended to compete directly with the SpaceX Falcon 9 and also the Russian Soyuz. In some respects, that vehicle has gone from being kind of commercially important to us to, some of our customers are absolutely reliant on us getting that vehicle built to get stuff on orbit because, as you mentioned, the Soyuz launch vehicles or anything Russian has exited the market, and not so much from sanctions, but just from really rotten behaviour. I think it's going to be a very long time, if at all, before someone will be willing to put a payload on a Russian rocket ever again.
There's a question's come through asking about the support that government provides and other financial institutions in New Zealand. Just a question asking what more could be done to help boost the success of the New Zealand space industry.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think New Zealand has a huge opportunity in front of it. We've kind of, busted down the door, but it's time for everybody to run through it. And I think the biggest thing the government could do is create a space strategy. We see lots of other governments investing heavily in space strategies. If you look at the space industry, it's predicted to be a $1.4 trillion industry by 2030. It's one of the fastest growing industries, there is. And it's all high tech, high paying, high waged economy jobs, all things that Kiwis are great at. So, some strategy and some planning, I think, and some investment would certainly, help New Zealand compete more globally. I mean, Rocket Lab itself, we have 1,500 New Zealand suppliers, and all of those suppliers are, producing space grade technologies that could all be taken to the world.
There's one question here which is quite a sort of forward-looking question, just asking you, what sector do you think will have the most satellites up in space in, say, 5 years' time that aren't there today? Where are you seeing those sort of trends in the growth?
Definitely, communications mainly around broadband. So broadband from space. there's a tremendous number of companies and startups at various levels investing very, very heavily in that technology. So the day where you can just download onto your cell phone directly from space is not far away.
I wanted to ask if we have any questions from the floor. I know we've got some roving mics around, and we haven't had anyone brave enough to put their hand up yet, I think. No, that's okay. Peter, perhaps just as we're starting to get to the end of our question time, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about other startups and entrepreneurs in New Zealand, because I know that you're a really big advocate for helping to grow more business and to really inspire businesses to dream a little bit bigger than perhaps we have in the past in New Zealand. So what would be some of your advice that you'd give, particularly those businesses that are looking to go to the US?
Well, I mean, the number one challenge that I see with New Zealand entrepreneurs is just not thinking big enough, and kind of staying in the comfort of New Zealand and not expanding and going big. I was born in the bottom of the South Island in Invercargill. If I can build a space company, then anybody can do anything. There is no barriers. So the one thing I always try and mentor and encourage New Zealand entrepreneurs is think bigger, way bigger. And especially if you're starting a company, that's a super hard, painful thing to do. So don't start a company with the aim of building a $100 million company. Start a company with the aim of building a $100 billion company, and set the sights high. And don't be afraid to get on a plane. The world is big. New Zealand's always comfortable and it's always home, but the world is big and you can go do amazing things. So don't be shy.
Yeah, and I wondered if you could also maybe touch a little bit on capital raising, because I know Rocket Lab, right from the early days, you've had those sort of tier one Silicon Valley venture capital firms on your on your cap table, Koshler Ventures, Lockheed Martin. And they're so synonymous with the industry and world-changing tech. But again, that is an area that New Zealand businesses struggle with, is to raise capital within New Zealand and also offshore. What advice would you give New Zealand companies?
Get on a plane. The world is awash with capital, and I always say that the least valuable thing an investor will ever give you is their money. The most valuable thing will be all their contacts and experience and expertise. And if you look at Rocket Lab, for example, as you pointed out, we started off with tier ones. Those tier ones ultimately introduced us to their limited partners. Their limited partners introduced us to sovereign wealth funds, and then into an IPO. So it's about setting up the trajectory of the company from day one without massive dilution. And I see this time and time again with New Zealand companies, is they'll go out and do a seed round with a 35% dilution rate and go and do an A round, and then come to the Silicon Valley or somewhere else to go and raise, and the founder is so diluted that they're uninvestable. So as New Zealanders, it's a big world. You don't feel like you have to take the deal that's in front of you. Always shop the deal internationally and see what you can achieve.
Yeah, that's some great advice. I might close by just trying to wrap a couple of these comments together. There's been some comment come in that says you're awesome, Peter. So, and I think probably we'll share that sentiment. But there's one question here just asking, what is that rocket behind you? Perhaps just so that doesn't get left as a burning question. Could you maybe tell us a little about that?
That's just a spare one. So that one's sitting there ready to go down to the Wallops Island launch site over in Virginia.
Awesome.
Always keep a spare rocket.
Some advice for all of us. Peter, thank you very much. That's been a really inspirational chat. Can we all give Peter a round of applause for joining us? And Peter, all the very best with the Capstone mission to the moon. I know that your success and Rocket Lab's success is also our success, and we will all be watching it with a lot of interest, I'm sure. So now I would love to invite Fran O'Sullivan back onto the stage, and she is going to introduce our next session. So thank you very much, Fran.
Just going to make a little bit more room on the stage, perhaps, for later. It would be okay. Anyway, excuse me, I'm talking too much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Greg Foran. Greg, as you know, has been in the headlines multiple times over the last couple of years, but we always think of him as being the CEO of Air New Zealand, this iconic airline, which has faced quite difficult times, yet kept us flying internationally, looking after our exporters, and also particularly domestically. But prior to that, Greg had a very interesting and stellar career in the United States at Walmart. He has an in-depth knowledge of the grocery area, following a long career in Australia. But after that, he took on the helm of America's biggest retailer, which is Walmart, and he led a large company in the United States, 4,700 stores, 1.4 million employees, and bringing in $350 billion a year. I mean, that's substantial. I mean, it rates quite well compared to the New Zealand economy, I think. Possibly overrates, I'm not quite sure of my numbers. But anyway, Greg will tell his story in taking on the role in the United States, what it took to make change at this American icon, and the lessons he learned along the way from very outstanding leaders and mentors. He'll also talk about the principles that, proven true in the United States, he is now employing in Air New Zealand. So welcome, Greg, to the stage. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Fran. Thank you, Michael. Good to see you, and thank you, everyone, for being here. And very pleased to hear that Peter Beck did a unashamedly good plug that everyone should get on a plane and start flying. Of course, today we opened up to visa waiver countries, so it's great to actually have some people back. As Fran said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Air New Zealand. There'll be some references. But instead, I'll take off my suit and I'll put on the Walmart vest and share with you some of the stories that I have that hopefully will be interesting to you about the United States. So the United States, the land of the free, the home of the brave, a most intriguing country, exciting, innovative, but also a complicated and bifurcated society. You know, I first went to the USA in 2011. Now, I'd been plenty of times before that, but prior to that, it had mainly been as a tourist. Not just as a tourist in terms of being on vacation. I'd obviously done that many times, but instead in relation to business. But, you know, even when you visit for an extended period of time, you don't get to know a place quite the same. I think that changes once you have your own refrigerator and a mailbox. You see, you start getting up every single day and going to work. You start establishing connections with people that deepen day in, day out over time. And as you do, you start sensing the rhythm of the place, and then something changes. The relationship becomes much more intimate. You understand the culture more intuitively. You also have a hand in the game. And the place influences you, and to a certain extent, you have an influence on the communities to which you're part of. Now, the United States is an enormous country. From east to west, north to south, it covers 6 time zones. It's home to over 350 million people, and most of them are immigrants. And it's got a tapestry of cultures, of religions, mostly held together by a belief in liberty. Liberty from lawmakers, liberty from leaders, even liberty from one another. And so in a sense, it's a contradiction. The United States' sense of unity is rooted to a very great extent in a fierce spirit of independence. The independence of freedoms of the individual. And you know, on and off over the best part of a decade, I got to see the country through the eyes of Middle America, where frankly is where most of the population lives. And these are the places that tourists seldom venture. Liberal Kansas, Meridian, Mississippi, New Iberia, Louisiana. And in these communities, which are mostly small and middle-sized towns, there are usually two common meeting places. One is a local church, and the other is a store that covers 4 acres on a 25-acre site, Walmart. And these two places typically reflect the heartbeat of the community, and taken together, they reflect the spirit and the mindset of the country. Now, very early on when I joined Walmart, 2 aspects struck me. First, there was a lot more poverty in middle America than I ever imagined. And second, a lot of those people on the breadline shopped at Walmart. And because of the job I had, I got to know our core customer, which is to say, in a very real sense, I got to know America. My American education actually began many years before that. And like many interesting journeys do, it began by accident. You see, it was late 1992 and I was on a Qantas plane on a trip to Seoul to buy pet accessories because I was working as a buyer for Woolworths here in New Zealand. And as I was walking through the airport, I spied a book. Amazon hadn't started by then, so we all used to grab the paperbacks. It was called Made in America. It was written by Samuel M. Walton, the founder of Walmart. And it is a story of a true pioneer, an entrepreneur, a man with a dream and a purpose that was both beautiful in its simplicity and bold in its ambitions. Now, it turns out that Sam had passed away only 2 weeks before. President George Bush, the senior Bush that is, had decided that he would go to Bentonville just before Sam had passed. And he presented Sam with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In his speech accepting the award, Sam summarised the Walmart vision that he'd been building for over the 30 years since he'd founded the company. He said, if we work together, we'll lower the cost of living for everyone, and we're going to give the world an opportunity to see what it's like to save and have a better life. Now, I began reading the book on the first leg of the flight to Sydney on Air New Zealand and continued reading on the next leg from Sydney to Seoul. And it was on the second part of this journey that a man with an American accent leaned across from his seat and asked me if I was enjoying the read. And I told him I was, and I was 3/4 of the way through the book by then. I took a punt and I asked him if he worked for Walmart. Well, it turns out he was the pet food buyer for the world's largest retailer. So I quizzed him, incessantly actually. Did Sam really have shareholders' meetings at his house each year? And did Helen, his wife, and he really cook lunch for that meeting? Was it really fried chicken and salad? Did he really get up at 4:30 a.m. every day and go through the numbers from the previous day? Did he really go home for lunch each day? Did he really send the manager out of the store when he was doing a tour and sit down with the associates with tins of tuna fish and saltine crackers and get feedback direct from the staff? Did he really carry a yellow legal pad? Though he was probably sorry that he'd ever asked me what I thought of the book, this Walmart pet food buyer patiently answered every single question. Incidentally, the answer to every question was yes, he did, really. So as this conversation went on, I learned more and more. And by the end of the flight, and the pet food and I parted ways, I'd become incredibly intrigued by this business, its purpose, and by its founder and leader. Wind the clock forward, it's 8 years later. It's 2000, I'm living in Australia, and I'm working for Woolworths over there. Roger Corbett is the CEO, and one of the best retailers in the world in my view. And he invites me to join a few others of his executive team on a tour of the US. The tour includes time with Walmart executives, and in particular, a retired Walmart executive who at one time was Sam Walton's right-hand man, Jack Shoemaker. I vividly recall my first sight of Jack striding through the foyer of a hotel in Dallas. And as I shook his hand, I can remember thinking, this is the guy who in chapter 6 of that book donned a grass skirt and did the hula on checkout number 5 in a store that was reopened in a matter of weeks after being destroyed by a tornado. He did this as a result of a challenge he'd made to the store associates. He told them, you get the store opened ahead of schedule, I'll wear the skirt and do the dance. Well, they met the challenge. I took from this 2 lessons. First of all, that people enjoy good challenge. And secondly, they appreciate leaders who don't always take themselves too seriously. You know, as I got to know Jack, he took me under his wing. He taught me, he encouraged me. On my very first day as CEO of Dick Smith Electronics, a subsidiary of Woolworths, he writes on the whiteboard in the boardroom, the only sustainable competitive advantage is speed. Oh, how true that statement has turned out to be. It only took a day before I'd copied him and I had a BlackBerry on my belt. And I suspect most of those who've worked with me in the past and even today would say that I don't stand still for too long. I push hard for change, encourage curiosity, and sometimes even failure. And you'd better run to keep up. So make no mistake, culture and tone are set from the top. Another moment stands out for me. I'm touring a Big W store. It's about 20 years ago, and we're standing in the men's toiletry sections. Jack asks the young team member who looked after the section, what's the item that's getting the most attention from customers? Well, that's men's skin care. There's a lot of customers are looking for those items now, she promptly said. And as it turns out, this young shop assistant was 100% right. Because that category likely still does have significant growth. Jack encouraged me then to expand sections ahead of the growth, shrink the ones that had passed their use by date ahead of time. And the power of listening to the front line has never left me. If you want the unvarnished truth, then go seek it from those doing the job. They know what's going on. They also know what's coming. I'll give you a very recent example. Just a week ago, a Monday night, I was doing in-flight service on my way back from Sydney. A packed plane, and sure enough, the learnings just keep on coming. Now, the good news is we had enough beef and chicken, and we didn't even run out of the vegetarian pasta. On the other hand, I found out we didn't have enough arrival cards due to us increasingly carrying completely full flights. Now back with Jack in Walmart. Another recollection I have is visiting a host of stores in the US with him and dissecting competitors, only with a view to understanding what they did better than us. That's right, what they did better than us. And as we left each store, he'd ask me what I saw that was ahead of what we ever did. And if I didn't pick up on all the components, he'd point them out to me. Did you see that woman's hosiery layout and unit? Wasn't it outstanding? How about the way they displayed the leafy greens and fruit and veg? What about the size of the price points in the action aisle? He had little to no interest in me espousing what I thought we were superior in. Now, this was also something Sam Walton was famous for doing, and then shamelessly adopting the best ideas for his own stores. This is another lesson that stuck with me, which is why I flew back last week on a Singapore Airlines flight. I wanted to see what they're doing better than us. Most importantly, Jack challenged me. The fact is, I think he relished taking me out of my comfort zone, educating me that great leaders don't just need to manage feeling uncomfortable. They actually need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. There were countless Saturdays touring stores unannounced, and frankly, those days will stay for me forever. Often, it was Jack Shoemaker on my left, Roger Corbett on my right shoulder, and we'd walk stores one after the other. I'd be like Piggy in the middle, the apprentice with 2 sorcerers either side, and the quiz would begin before we even got to the store. It began 3 miles out. What do you see in the housing as we get closer? Is our location on the best side of the road? Did you see the signage from far enough away? What can you tell me about the cars in the parking lot? Is the parking lot clean? Is the entrance clear? What about the first item you see when you come in the door? Is the price of it okay? And on and on it went. And it always involved a trip to the restrooms to check those out too. Clean restrooms are a sign of a great store. By the end of the day, I'd be exhausted. I'd get home, I'd need 2 gin and tonics. A cup of tea and a lie down just wouldn't cut it. But wow, did I learn, and fast. Quite frankly, over that decade before Jack passed, I received firsthand a graduate level university course, not just in retail, but in leadership. And those lessons haven't left me at Air New Zealand. I don't do what I do on the front line for a PR exercise. I don't care much for that. I do it to learn to understand what exactly we need to do to get fixed and in what order to make change. You know, when you serve on a domestic plane and you get asked for a gluten-free offer and you can't provide one, then you better take notice. If you're doing Korowau, Wellington to Auckland, and you run out of cheese plates on row 17 and the customers tell you, hey, it always happens if you sit in the middle of the plane because we serve from both ends first, then you must act. In many cases, this is a cultural shift, and that's hard work, no shortcuts. These lessons all happened while Jack was consulting to Woolworths. I'd see him about 4 times a year, and always 1 or 2 of those would be in the US, often in Bentonville, where he lived and where Walmart's based. The next phase for me began in 2011. I'd missed out on the Woolly CEO job, and Walmart rang me up. Hey, we don't have a proper job for you, but, you know, something will come up. It always does. And we've got so much going on, they said. I took the plunge. I went forward on trust that something would happen, and it did. After about 4 months, an opportunity in China came up. There were some compliance issues that had led to multiple store lockdowns in Chongqing by the government. US companies should know better, the authorities stated, and they were right. 2.5 years after that, Walmart asked me to run the Asia region. So I went from Shenzhen to Hong Kong. We'd hardly finished unpacking, and 6 months after that, I went off to the US business. And so I arrive in Arkansas, northwest Arkansas to be precise, almost the middle of America, a flyover state, as many refer to it. But it is home to Tyson Chicken, to JB Hunt Trucking, and Walmart. And here I am, 1.4 million associates or staff, $350 billion in revenue, profit in excess of $20 billion, and it's a jewel in the crown of Walmart Incorporated. But the business had stalled. Sales were flat to negative, associates were dispirited, and while I'm trying to get my arms around this, I'm also learning to say trash instead of rubbish, restrooms instead of toilets, parking lots instead of car parks, and routes instead of routes. In some ways, coming to the US from China made the Americanness of America even more pronounced. And I experienced this in my first days as CEO, which was spent at the annual holiday meeting. Now, this holiday meeting is not what it sounds like. It takes place in August. And the purpose of the meeting is for people who run the stores, they all come together, to look at all the merchandise that's going to be highlighted during the upcoming holiday season. And that year's meeting took place in Denver, Colorado. So I flew to Denver on the company jet with my own security. And in addition to walking the conference center hall, my main job was to stand in front of 7,000 store managers, buyers, support staff, and others to introduce myself, share some wisdom. Now, that's a lot of people looking at you, expecting you to lead them. The main session is quite a production. During it, some of my direct reports do presentations, and there were a series of big-name celebrities, musical acts brought in to get this conference pumping away. And I was set to be last on stage, close the whole thing out. I did my best to share some initial thoughts and maybe give them, what I thought were 1 or 2 bits of wisdom. And I concluded with a challenge. Now, I don't think anyone who was there that day could tell you what those bits of wisdom were, but I bet you everyone who was there, and even some who weren't, who could tell you what the challenge was. You see, I asked every one of those 7,000 people to send me 3 ideas on how they and their team were going to drive sales for the holidays. I'd already learnt that Christmas was a no-go term. And then 3 areas where they thought management had cut muscle instead of fat in a quest to deliver a bottom line result for the business. What were the cuts that had been taken, and how had that impacted our customers and our associates? Well, that turned out to be a pretty good idea, because before I left the stage, I could feel the phone vibrating in my pocket. Those emails were starting to come in. You see, I ended up with 2,600 of them from stores, classified, if you like, into 3 groups. You see, group 1 were out of the blocks immediately. They were emailing me while I was still on stage, telling me in no uncertain terms that the previous administration had deleted the toilet seat covers in the restrooms, had removed the contractor to sweep the parking lots, and now expected managers to keep it clean while keeping the shelves stocked and making sure the customers were being seen to. And to top it off, they'd cut the wages so low they couldn't hire any staff or retain the ones they had. Now, the second group, they came in the following week. They were a bit more considered. These people had decided to head back to their stores and discuss it with their teams. And so they responded with a lengthy, more detailed reply. A few weeks later, the emails started coming in from the third group. Now, this group had waited to see what had happened with groups 1 and 2. And these were the long-serving 30, 40-year veterans with Walmart. They were suspicious of broken promises, so they'd waited until the word had spread that I was responding individually to every email, personally. Ever woken up to 475 emails in your inbox and then commit to responding to each one, ideally by the end of the day? Well, it's daunting, but I can tell you that this last set were pure gold, because they were the unvarnished truth on the business. Candace screamed from every page, and trust me, they got into detail. These were 3 to 4 page long emails that gave me a terrific insight on what needed to be done, in what order, and when. Now, incidentally, I followed that exact approach at Air New Zealand and then was introduced to COVID on the exact day that I started. Perfect timing, eh? Regardless, this approach formed the start of what would become 2 important pillars on how I would go about transformation that was required in Walmart US and the same in Air New Zealand. The first is that, as Peter Drucker, the management guru, has said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, fortunately, Walmart was grounded in a strong culture of no-nonsense candour. Sam Walton had instilled that in his company from the very beginning. Go right to the front lines, get the real story from the people who do the work. Of course, as you move out generations from the founder, that culture can and does get diluted. So it takes hard work, sometimes uncomfortable work, to maintain and strengthen that culture. Some years later, another legendary Walmart CEO, David Glass, told me he never had more than 2 or 3 layers of management between him and store associates. Lesson number 2, be clear about your purpose and your plan, and get the entire organisation laser focused on delivering it. Again, because it had a strong founder who had a clear vision, Walmart has always had a true north. And again, as Drucker has said, there's nothing so ineffective at being good at something that should never have been done at all. For Walmart, their purpose is clear: help people save money and live better. For Air New Zealand, it's about delivering the world's greatest flying experience. I will always be grateful to the mentors I've had throughout my career, and I'll always be grateful to Walmart and the lessons it taught me about the importance of a company's culture, in particular the culture fostered by Sam Walton. But I'll also be grateful to America. I believe the title of Sam's biography, Made in America, reflects the unique aspects of that country's culture, instilled centuries ago in its founding citizens who declared their independence and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I believe those uniquely American qualities not only make the American story possible, but also make stories like Walmart and other American enterprises thrive, in part to the ability of their people to speak out, to buck trends, to take risks, and also to be sceptical of authority and protective of their individuality. These are things that I have benefited from and continue to build into my approach to business and leadership. Now, a final note. Several times a year, Walmart holds a large town hall meeting where they'll recognise alumni of the company. These meetings are held in the Sam Walton Auditorium in Walmart's home office. And after one of these meetings, a man walked up to me and introduced himself. And he seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. He said, "I guess you really like the book." And I smiled. I said, "Yes, I did really. Thank you."
For a few questions, and I do hope. What I'm interested in are just, who are you mentoring now? Have you got people that you are mentoring, outstanding potential leaders of the future? Because clearly you were singled out by Roger Corbett and then obviously a colleague from the United States.
Yes, the shoe now sits on the other foot to
Yes.
some extent,
Yes.
and I realise I have a responsibility to do that.
Yeah.
And so I do endeavour to storytell, and that's effectively what the session was about, because I think that is a highly effective way of, teaching and training. And then also, when I get out and around the business, I encourage others to join me and to experience what I experience. So it does certainly sit on the other foot, and I know that I have a responsibility to do that. And, some of those lessons are just pure gold. And when you experience them and you understand them, then you realise the difference it can make.
Yeah, I mean, just coming to the store several Ks out and being asked, what do you see? So when you apply that same sort of lens, which has clearly been tutored in school by your time in the United States by two outstanding businessmen, how do you actually approach that when you looked at Air New Zealand when you came back? You must have been asking similar questions.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Fran, what are the chances of starting on the very day that you pull flights from Shanghai? 6 weeks later, your business has gone from 6 billion to literally nothing. As Dame Therese shared, we're in the middle of a capital raise, and I'll just smile at that one. So I haven't had quite that same opportunity, but what I can tell you is that the principles that I just shared now, I suspect work in any business in any country, any time. And, as recently as yesterday, I was out with Matt, who's here today, and we were out getting ready to do this press conference on the lamp testing, which Minister Verrill announced yesterday. So it's, 8 o'clock Sunday morning, and Matt and I are out there and we're getting ready to do this press conference. And Matt had arrived just before me, and he was talking to some of the staff, and they were talking about the automatic baggage system in international, and the fact that 4 of the units were down out of 13. And another device called a Kentucky was broken. And, the frustration that I have that here we are restarting, and we've still got lots and lots of things to do. And by the way, that was a problem before COVID. So these lessons apply, they're as relevant in an airline as what they were in a retail store.
We've got some interesting questions from the floor. And I'll start with one at the bottom from Stuart Wilson from Endace, which says, "Welcome back, Greg. What do you consider the most important factor in culture change?"
That's a great question and a tough one. The most important factor. Probably I think the most important thing is to to be very clear on what your culture is, to develop the principles around that, and then don't waver from it. I'll give you a very quick story and example. I know we're running short of time, but to give you a sense of it. You heard me mention David Glass in that story. David took over after Sam had passed, and David unfortunately passed himself only a couple of years ago. But I would go round every 6 months and I'd meet with David, and he was 80, 82 years of age, just so wise and so much experience. And I can remember getting into a conversation with him one day. We were just over a cup of coffee at his place. And he said to me, he can remember sitting there, and he'd just taken over the business. There was a meeting, executive was sitting up the front. Sam was also up there, but he was the executive chairman, sort of retiring. And they were going to miss the quarter. And Walmart didn't like missing quarters. Who does? And so the discussion got going in the officers' meeting. What are we going to do to get the quarter? Well, we can pull back on store wages, we can reduce overtime, we can slow down paying suppliers, all the normal tricks that people get into. And they worked it all out, and they had the whiteboard up there, and they worked out they were going to get an extra 100 million. They'd get the quarter. And so they all felt pretty good about that. And Sam was sitting quietly down the end, and Sam said, that's terrific, David. Thanks, and thanks to everyone for putting their backs in. It's going to be great. We're going to get the quarter. But here's the thing. You're not doing any of that. Because all of the things that you've just spoken about are either going to hurt our customers or they're going to hurt our associates. And I didn't start this company on that basis. And so I said to David, I said, well, what happened? He said, we got the quarter. Do you know that about 6 weeks later, exactly the same thing happened to me? I'm sitting down there. We're about 3 years into the recovery of the US business. My finance guy, Michael Dasdew, concerned about whether we're going to hit the numbers. The team goes around the table. All the officers are there. And I just recalled this conversation I had with David 6 weeks ago. I said, it's very good. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Judith. I'm indebted to you. Thank you, everyone. That's very good. But you're not doing any of it. And what happened was that you could literally feel the energy in the room rise because everyone knew it was the wrong thing to do. And the other amazing thing that happened is, guess what? We got the quarter. So how do you as a leader ensure that when you set a culture that you have the perseverance, the grit to actually run the course when the going gets tough? Because when it's easy, it's not when you really get tested.
What is it about you that enabled you to soak up these lessons from mentors? Because some people do not accept mentorship. They kind of know it from day one. And what is it in your own personality which enabled you to be humble enough, I guess, to actually pay attention to men who were considerably older than you and learn?
I think two things. I think, first of all, I'm very fortunate in terms of how I got brought up by my mum and dad, both school teachers. I didn't grow up with lots of wealth or money or these experiences. That was how I got brought up. But the second thing is, which is associated with that, I do my best to have no ego. I think ego, that three-letter word, is one of the things that stops people learning and feeling that they can develop and grow. And an incredible thing happens with mentors, and I share this with my team quite often. If you can find people that can help mentor you and not have the ego, and listen to their advice, but not just listen, act on it, an amazing thing happens. Chances are that what they've told you is right, and it works out. And then they are encouraged to give you more advice. So I worked out pretty early on that if I listen to Jack or listen to Roger or listen to Paul, who helps me a lot, or Charlie, and these are people who I keep close to me, and I don't have any ego, I haven't got all the answers, help me with the answers, and then I do it, they get encouraged by the fact that I took action, and then they say, well, that worked, here's another idea.
You came to Air New Zealand and were confronted with a crisis very quickly. Did you have anyone you could call on that was experienced in the industry to help you through what must have been actually quite devastating?
Yeah, it was. and challenging, because I had a lot of changes also with the executive team and all the other things. So once again, I've got a friend in Australia. I actually caught up with him the first time in a year last week. He was able to fly over, and I had dinner with him. And he happened to be very friendly with a chap called Sir Rod Eddington. Oh, yeah. And Sir Rod had grown up in Cathay Pacific. I'd heard of Sir Rod, but I'd never ever met him. And when I got the job in Air New Zealand, my friend David had said, look, I've got a mate of mine that I went to school with and I still stay in touch with, Rod Eddington. Maybe at some point you should get in touch with him. Well, I don't wait for those things. I immediately emailed Rod. I got his email address and said, look, if you're ever around, I'd love to catch up. And so we did end up actually catching up before the whole world shut down. It was in that first week. He was actually over here visiting his son. And he said, look, I'm free in the afternoon. Can I catch up? So I still talk to Rod quite regularly. And this is a guy who's a Wikipedia on airlines. And so I can say to him, Rod, what do you think I should do with these wide-bodied planes? Put them in the desert, he said. Everyone's going to tell him to keep them here, keep them warm. It's all going to be over in 5 minutes. Put them in the desert. Rod, what do you think I should do about how many types of planes? Listen, you're a small airline, simplify your business. And it's that sort of thing that, the clarity, the simplicity on the far side of complexity that allows you to move forward.
Thank you. Your leadership is from the floor, from Claire Rostoff, I think. I'm sorry, I can't quite see it. Your leadership is globally recognised, a kind leader with assertive and clear direction that inspires others to join you in the journey. How do you lead?
Situationally, I guess, is the way that I think most of us will tend to lead. As a general principle, I like to build trust. I like to bring people on the journey. I'm a great believer in show me I see, tell me I hear, involve me, I understand. But there are times, situationally, where you need to adopt slightly different styles, and as long as you signal that clearly, then that's fine. I can tell you at the moment, the thing that keeps me awake the most at the moment with Air New Zealand is restarting this business. Now, a few weeks ago, it was a capital raise, but at the moment, it's restarting the business. And, it's tough with an airline. It's this massive jigsaw puzzle with 5,000 pieces. And most importantly, it's got to get done safely. So unashamedly, there are times when I will be quite blunt and candid now about you must be safe. In fact, a message that I've sent out today to the entire business is to say, if you see something happening unsafe in our airline right now, you can stop it. Just stop the airline. I've got your back.
And the response?
Well, that's a weekly note that I send out to all the team. Zelda, who looks after me wonderfully, she'll let me know how that's landed.
Look, two quick questions to answer for, which are quite disparate. What does Singapore Airlines do better than Air New Zealand?
Do you know, there was a risk when I wrote that line in there. I knew I was going to get that question. And I appreciate you leaving it till there's 3 minutes, 2 minutes 59 left.
You're not getting away with the top
answer. The answer is quite a lot, to be honest. And I am known for being reasonably unvarnished and candid. The product on our wide-body planes is now the best part of 20 years old. It's a plane that came out of Virgin Atlantic. And, as a customer, I would be coming back to New Zealand. I've lived out of the country for, 35 years or something or other. So I would travel Air New Zealand quite often every year coming back. And I must admit, over the last few years, I was sort of getting on those planes, particularly out of the US, and I'd be sitting up the front. And I'd go, well, this was pretty good 7 years ago, 10 years ago. It's not so good today. I've done 3 international trips in the last week, and it's definitely outdated. So, we've got to do something with that seating configuration, the space that's available. I feel a bit too far side on when it takes off. I can't look out the windows. There's a whole bunch of things around that. What I do think we do particularly well, and I'm proud of, is that by and large we've held the service ethic And it's been tough, because you've had to let go a third of your workforce and we're highly unionised. But I think we've held the spirit of the company together, and most people who are with us still want to be here and want us to win. So lots to learn.
Okay. We are running out of time, and you can see that last question I am going to ask you, and that is one from Anonymous. Greg, you need to go for Prime Minister. We need someone with your drive, innovation and persona, fresh and future focused. Would you?
No.
Why?
I like doing what I do. I like being able to go in and hopefully make a difference to customers and associates or staff. That's what I like doing. And I don't like going slowly. I like to be able to move at a bit of pace. And that's the value that I think I can give. Now, I am actually, I'm really pleased that I took the Air New Zealand gig because, it'd been great in retail, but sort of what were you going to do after the US? It's a bit risky, isn't it, my age, saying, well, you're going to go and do something completely different. And I knew nothing about planes, apart from what you would know as a passenger, unless you're an aviation expert. But boy, I've learnt, and I've enjoyed the learning. It has been tough, but I'm glad I'm doing it, and I hope that I can make a difference to all our staff, to you, all of whom will fly with us at various points, and also to New Zealand Incorporated, because I do recognise that we are a very forward-facing brand for New Zealand Inc.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a superb masterclass. You've been candid, you've been fresh, you've shared with us insights that, takes a decade, have been mentored by some of the world's best. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Greg Foran. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fran and Greg. I could see how absorbed everyone was. And that one of those last comments I saw come through asking Greg, when are you writing your book?